This week on Arizona Illustrated, a living legacy the Maxwell family gives back to Tucson.
My mother was a teacher at Marana, and so she taught the black students from the 1st through the 9th grade. The families were cotton pickers.
Quin Davis and the secret art of practical special effects.
I don't know why, but E.T. freaked me out when I was growing up. It wasn't supposed to exist, you know, it wasn't natural, there was something wrong with it.
And Tucson marathoner Sarah Sellers continues her rise in the running world.
Sometimes when you're out there just hammering and pushing yourself, and in the middle of that, you'll kind of just get these chills and you just like feel really good.
Welcome to Arizona Illustrated. I'm Tom McNamara. Nearly 80 years ago, the Maxwell family moved to Tucson. Over the decades, they helped pave the way for many of the positive changes we see in our community. The Maxwells created important educational opportunities for African Americans, and they tore down many of the barriers that stood in the way of progress. The Maxwell legacy is strong, significant, and lasting.
I was born at my mother's house, and my father was a principal of the Buchanan School in Topeka, Kansas. When I was 12 years old, we moved to Tucson, Arizona, when my father was offered a job as a principal at the all-segregated Black Dunbar School.
My great-grandfather was born a slave. My great-grandfather, they were part of the Maxwell House coffee plantation in Tennessee. My grandfather grew up in Kansas.
My mother was a teacher at Marana, and she was, the school, they were segregated everywhere, and so she taught the black students from the 1st through the 9th grade. And they were all their families were cotton pickers. My mother and I used to go out there every weekend and talk to the parents, ask her why their kids didn't go to school, and my mother would say, the education is worth more than the money you'll make picking cotton.
District policy prohibited Mrs. Morgan from teaching at the same school as her husband. Dunbar was built in 1913 and was originally known as the Colored School. It consisted of 2 rooms with no cafeteria or auditorium. Those, along with 23 classrooms, were not built until 1948, 8 years into Morgan Maxwell Sr.'s tenure as principal.
And I was the only student in the Tucson district who went to the same school where their father was a principal. We had excellent teachers. They would tell the girls, you have 2 choices, either be a maid or get an education. And with the guys, you had 3. You could either be a maintenance man or go into the military or get an education. And why our teachers were the best, there were no black engineers, there were no black bankers or architects or any other field, but there were blacks who were trained in those fields, so therefore our teachers were the best.
At my grandfather's school, he made Time magazine because he was the only principal who didn't have a police officer on his campus, because he was afraid that the police officer would interview these kids and get intel on their parents. So he was trying to prevent kids from having records and parents from having records.
In 1951, by state law, Arizona schools began to be integrated, slowly, but a few years ahead of most other states. Education, however, is only one objective of a community. Segregation and racism continued to exist throughout Tucson.
It was totally segregated as far as the restaurants at the theaters. Like at the theaters, at the Fox Theater, we had what is known as the crow's nest, that we would sit in the top 3 rows. And when I went to high school, friends of mine like Carl Eller and Frank Borman and all my white friends, we would meet and go to the downstairs at the popcorn stand at the Fox Theater. Then I'd go upstairs, and they'd all stay down on the 1st floor, and then we would meet afterwards. There were several parks here, but the only park we could use was Ori Park, and they would change the water every Saturday morning, so we would swim in the dirty water Friday. All of the restaurants were segregated, but it changed when the civil rights changed, when the civil rights laws were put on the books.
Not all establishments immediately complied with the legally mandated integration. Some businesses required more persuasion, like a notable Tucson restaurant on the old Benson Highway.
It was the only place where blacks could not eat, so we all said that has to stop. So we went down to the Pickwick Inn and we blocked the doors. And I was standing in the doorway for hours, and we wouldn't let anybody through.
While attending the University of Arizona, Maxwell was told he couldn't take an international finance course because blacks couldn't get a job in that field. He graduated with a finance degree and later received an MBA from USC. In 1961, Maxwell began a long and successful career in real estate appraisal. Through his expertise, he alone was able to navigate the obstacles that stood in the way of the sale of a house to the first black head coach of a major university. That was Fred Snowden, with the U of A in 1972. Maxwell continued his steadfast fight for justice throughout his career. He served as the chairman of the State of Arizona Civil Rights Commission under 2 governors. His example and his accomplishments are a legacy for the community and for his family.
My dad, he really didn't, he was a very modest person. I knew more about my grandfather. My dad was very modest and didn't really brag about anything. We would talk about it at dinner, and I didn't really appreciate the significance of what he did at that time. Because as a youth, you think you know everything, and it's hard to comprehend. Until I got older, did I really realize how important that was. My dad always told me to have integrity, ethics, to always be the best, and to work hard, and to treat others with respect, and to be open to people. Include them, don't exclude them. I work as a lawyer and I work as a professor, so I get to give back to the kids. Being a professor, I tell them where I screwed up. I try and guide them in the right direction. And in the legal practice, I'm a prosecutor, so I get to dole out the punishment, and I get to make judgment calls as to where mercy should be made and where someone should be punished. So I think with my background, I'm fair and ethical, and I try and do that with every person, every victim, every defendant. I try and listen to them and make a sound decision. It's ironic how history tends to repeat itself. What's good about it, though, is I think that we are getting a younger generation with fresh eyes, fresh ideas, not as much baggage that has been going on with the generations before. So I think they'll be able to handle it a lot better.
Those young people include another generation of Maxwells. Skylar, a track star like her grandfather, excels on a path he helped open for her.
I like to run because I do track and field and cross country. And I like to play sports, but I also love to do math and science. I might want to be an engineer, and I think that education's good for doing that. I think that it shouldn't be discriminated because everybody's the same inside, just maybe not outside. My parents have just taught me to respect people no matter what they look like.
I hope she just enjoys her life and is happy. That's really basically all we want for our children, to get a good education, to be happy, to live this life, that is better than the generation before.
If you're a movie lover like me, you grew up being thrilled, frightened, entertained in the era when special effects were created by hand. With the advent of computer-generated effects, Quin Davis represents an endangered breed of cinematic artist. But he continues plying his trade through secret methods and time-honored techniques that can send a shiver down your spine.
My door won't be open completely, but these people kind of wander in. I'll be working. Somebody will tap me on the back, be like, well, I've never seen a place like this. And like, yeah, there aren't too many places like this left. Practical special effects. My name's Quin Davis. I'm a practical special effects artist. Right now we're in my shop. This is where I fabricate and create any prosthetics, creature suits, and various things for film projects. Independent films, big budget films. The first project that I ever did was a drawing of a buffalo soldier. My dad, is a big fan. He was pretty impressed. He was like, this isn't, this doesn't suck. This is all right, I didn't start sculpting till I was about 10. And then it was a Bob Marley bust. So it was a natural transition. I didn't really put too much thought into it. I don't know why, but E.T. freaked me out when I was growing up. It wasn't supposed to exist, it wasn't natural. There was something wrong with it. I started paying attention to more horror films and the art of practical special effects, maybe as like a coping mechanism, I don't know. And then it turned into a full-blown fixation. To understand how to do practical special effects around that age of going into 14 and 15, I would read. One of the things I do predominantly, and a lot of practical effects artists do, is blood. I'm sure that every practical special effects artist that truly loves the craft has their own blood mixture. I took my recipe from Dick Smith in Taxi Driver. That was the best blood I'd ever seen. He's really the uncle of practical special effects, and like Lon Chaney is the godfather. The industry was built on practical effects. Without practical effects, there is no movie business. Try to do an inquisitive look there. Should I eat this person? When I go out or interview for a job or get a job just hired from my work, my website, more times than not, they're surprised that I'm Black. I've worked on films in chronological order. It would be Kingdom, Hancock, Battleship, Middlemen. Growing up, even with horror films and films in general, I never entirely got to see myself, represented in a majority of these films. Extremely underrepresented in the industry, especially content, but crew as well, even if the main characters are Black. My experience on Hancock was great. That was probably the most diverse set that I got to work on. My initial assignment was Will Smith. So every time he was on set, I would have to go to his trailer and then basically bird dog him throughout the day while he was there. If I were in, like a hot spot, like California, Hawaii, Louisiana, something like that, then you can do really well for yourself. Here, it's uphill battle for sure. You got to figure out where you can apply this stuff and who has an appreciation for it. When people wander into the studio, their first question usually is probably, don't you have nightmares? Aren't you troubled by this stuff? I don't really have nightmares. I have great dreams. It's like butterscotch and ponies. I'm not kidding. Billie Holiday was always playing in my parents' house, and one of the songs that always gave me nightmares was Strange Fruit.
Blood on the leaves and blood at the road.
So those are the only things that would actually plague me. It's always in there. It's in my brainstem, these stories that are actually terrifying to me. Horror movies I love, but certain aspects of the American experience, let's say, are actually terrifying.
Tucson-based nurse and distance runner Sarah Sellers trains every day, but unlike many runners who dominate the big races, she had only run one marathon when she entered the best-known race in the country in 2018, one that was marked by freezing temperatures and driving rain. Her approach to training prepared her for a great run that day.
Suffering is sometimes what leads to the greatest highs in running. But sometimes when you're out there just hammering and pushing yourself, and in the middle of that, you'll kind of just get these chills and you just feel really good. It's only when you're kind of making yourself suffer that you get that high. I'm Sarah Sellers. I'm a professional runner and a full-time nurse anesthetist here in Tucson. I'm from Ogden, Utah. I grew up on the Wasatch Front. So beautiful trails, beautiful mountains in my backyard. And I started running pretty early at my parents going on the trails behind our house in the mornings. So I just started joining them on the trail runs, and I'm sure I slowed them down, but they were always super supportive. I just fell in love with running and with being on the trails. Kind of started competing in middle school and high school. I definitely wasn't the fastest runner on the team, but by my senior year of high school, I'd won a few state championships, and it wasn't really this realization oh, I have all this natural talent. It was just I knew that I loved the process of running, I loved being outside, and then the work that I put in really paid off. My first marathon was Huntsville, Utah, and that was last fall. I hadn't done any marathon-specific training for it. It was actually held on the last day that you could qualify for Boston, and I won the marathon for women's division, and I've never been so sore in my life. I couldn't run for 2 weeks after, but it kind of gave me a glimpse that I thought if I could put in a good block of training, that a marathon could be something that I thought I could succeed at. I'm running 90 to 100 miles a week. The vast majority of my miles are on the roads or on the Tucson Loop path. I would rather run in the cold any day, but I think running in the heat has been beneficial for me. Being an elite distance runner does require a lot of sacrifices. You're either injured or almost injured. I had several stress fractures. One stress fracture that ended my collegiate career. It could have potentially never healed. There was one run, a 14-mile run. I started off in shorts and it started raining. I tripped, really scraped my knee hard and pretty hypothermic. I had no nutrition. The sleet turned to snow. And I remember my legs hurt so bad. That was probably the coldest I've ever been. But it taught me that I could do hard things. The morning of the Boston Marathon, there was snow on the ground, yet it was raining. I think I was wearing 5 layers on top and bottom because I didn't want to waste energy shivering. My #1 goal was a time goal. I wanted to run faster than 2:37, and in those conditions, I knew that would likely be impossible. Once the gun went off, the conditions are just crazy, and you feel like you're in a car wash. The wind, I think, was 20, 25 miles an hour and direct headwind the whole way. But I just tucked right in, kind of to the back of this group of elite women, and after about a mile or two, the lead group broke off, and we started breaking into smaller groups.
And now things are blowing sideways.
Now, along with the rain, you can see the temperature is -1 Celsius.
And somewhere after halfway, another of the elite women passed me, and I went with her. She was running a pace that I didn't think I could keep. I was pretty tired at that point. I didn't know how I'd feel the last 3 miles of the marathon, but I thought, like, I'm just gonna stick with her. So I stuck with her for about 8 miles, and then with about 3 miles to go, just went for it. I was kind of delirious at that point, don't remember a lot of the details, but then the home stretch, I felt like I was just in a screaming tunnel of people. I remember thinking, like, everyone's super excited, I must be doing really well, but then the first place of the men's division passed me with about 150 meters to go. I thought, like, they're cheering for him, they're not cheering for me.
And here is Sarah Sellers of the United States.
I thought, like, I'm somewhere in the mid-pack of women. And then I crossed the finish line and I asked the race volunteers, what place am I, what place am I? And one of them said I was second, and like I just had to have her keep repeating it because I thought there's no way I was second. That's not possible, like that doesn't happen. And my next thought was I need to go find someone that I know and verify that this is real life and that actually happened. And my husband actually was jumping up and down and like yelling, "You're second at the freaking Boston Marathon." That's, I think, when it hit me that it was real. On that day, the opportunity that presented itself was very different. Second place wasn't going to go to someone who could run in good conditions. It was going to go to me, who didn't necessarily have the right credentials to get second, but my body held up under the elements. It's given me a lot of faith in myself, because there's definitely runs more often than I'd like to admit where you don't feel like running. You don't feel good. But just getting out there and doing it is a success.
I'm awake, I'm away, am I dreaming? I'm awake, am I dreaming? I'm awake, am I dreaming?
And now, from our Far Afield series, this is June West performing Do Me Right, recorded on location at DeGrazia Gallery in the Sun.
Won't you give me a little time and attention, time and attention, whoa. Don't you want to be Venetian blinds, letting in the light to a dark room? I know that it won't last forever, but I can let you slip into the night. Oh, now you can call me baby, hey baby, do me right. Oh, now you can call stuck in my mind like the first kiss of bliss without the lips. A long lost connection, spinning radio waves all over the road. If I could touch you again, I would live 1,000 years or more. Oh, oh. Give it to me, I'll give it to you. Worth it to me, I'll make it worth it for you. This is a magical ride, magical ride. Matching each stride, rolling side by side. These waves are breaking me down. I was riding the clouds, now my feet are rooted to the ground. I'm trying to get back to the house on the mountain where quality love flows free and easy from a fountain.
Thank you for joining us here on Arizona Illustrated. I'm Tom McNamara. See you next week.